too.
Did you yourself participate in stopping the bear, Mr. President?
Yes, I regret to say.
Why do you regret, Mr. President?
Because he's a fine creature. This is his valley. This valley belonged to the bear, and we're the intruders here.
The time has come for us to say sayonara. My heart.
It was a story about a Zen master and a little boy. Yeah.
In the summer of 1950, the Korean People's Army marched south, kicking off what officially became known as the Korean War. Most people would place the start of the Korean War at the eve of the invasion by the North in 1950. Others, who are much more informed on it, would place it immediately following the division of the peninsula, which occurred 5 years earlier in August 1945. But what if I told you it has its origins going much farther back? Back to only a mere 17 years after America's own Civil War of North and South. On May 22, 1882, having arrived from the USS Ticonderoga 4 years prior, naval officer Robert Wilson Schufelt will make history as the American representative of the Joseon United States Treaty of Peace, Amity, Commerce, and Navigation. The first treaty Korea as a whole will have with the US, and the last it will have as a united peninsula. Within the treaty's articles, it included several preferential policies for the United States and its citizens, with Article 14 requiring Korea to consider America the most favored nation in every future foreign treaties. However, more equitably, Article 11 gave both governments permission to allow exchange students to either country. But most importantly was Article 1 of the treaty. It required that should Korea fall under hostile relations or occupation by another country, the US will come to the aid of Korea, and vice versa should the US fall into conflict with another nation. At least in theory.
Guys, who would you say are your role models?
Well, I think I'd have to say my biggest role model is Matt. And I guess I'd have to say mine is Theodore Roosevelt for his work with the Rough Riders in the Spanish-American War.
A man named Teddy was our president. Had a great catchphrase, this is how it went. Ba ba ba, bully bully, bully bully, ba ba ba, bully bully.
In modern American politics, Theodore Roosevelt is considered one of the last great American leaders, and possibly the least contentious American president, if not the least contentious Republican, as even Lincoln has his own contemporary detractors.
Theodore Roosevelt, 26th President of these United States of America, at your service.
Teddy Roosevelt's greatest legacy beyond his outdoorsman image was his progressive politics, such as the Pure Food and Drug Act. However, Roosevelt's legacy is a very different story in Korean history. It is not a legacy of greatness, but rather betrayal and hatred.
May the breath of Theodore Roosevelt be like the wind that he has sent across the Pacific. Wind that bends the trees of aggression and injustice, but a true wind marked also for its warmth. An American wind.
Following the defeat of Spain in the Spanish-American War, the US turned its guns on the Filipinos it fought alongside and annexed the islands. However, in that time, the Japanese had its own war with the Russian Empire, and by the summer of 1905, the Japanese were on the verge of victory. On a return trip from the newly colonized Philippines, then Secretary of War and future President, William Howard Taft did a detour to Japan. There he met Japanese Prime Minister Taro Katsura. In their meeting, Katsura expressed concern for the future of the Korean peninsula and assured Taft that should Korea remain independent, it would fall to possibly Qing or Russian rule. In the sentiments expressed by many within Japan's Meiji court, Katsura explained to Taft that the Koreans were too backwards and uncivilized to govern themselves. The Japanese had their own white man's burden to deal with. Taft agreed with Katsura and assured him that America has no interests in preventing the Japanese from taking Korea, so long as Japan has no interests in taking the Philippines from America. While this was not an officially recognized agreement, Taft in his position had just violated the first article of the Schufelt Treaty. Upon Taft's return to Washington, Theodore Roosevelt was pleased with Taft's decision in Japan. When the Russo-Japanese War broke out in February of 1904, It wouldn't be until months later in July that the Japanese began questioning if the war was ever going to end. They began shopping for an intermediary to end the conflict. However, it wouldn't take that long, as they already knew of someone who had a bias in their favor. Theodore Roosevelt was unique in that he publicly held strong, enthusiastic support for the growing Japanese empire. Something uncommon for most Westerners, but something very beneficial for Japan. By early 1905, Theodore Roosevelt was sending messages to Tsar Nicholas, informing him that the Japanese were ready for a mediation. The Russians wouldn't respond until early spring, when it became clear there was no victory for them in sight. And by June 8th, it was decided Portsmouth, Maine would be the location of the peace treaty. Between August 6th to August 30th, negotiations between Russia and Japan commenced. During these negotiations, Japan made it very clear of their intention to take Korea entirely. On September 9th, the treaty was officially signed, and it was put into effect in the following October. On November 17, 1905, in Seoul, the Japan-Korea Treaty was signed, removing Korea's diplomatic independence and making the country a protectorate of Japan. The following year, Roosevelt received the Nobel Peace Prize for ending the Russo-Japanese War.
As a little boy, on his 14th birthday, he gets a horse. And everybody in the village says, how wonderful, the boy got a horse. And the Zen master says, we'll see. 2 years later, the boy falls off the horse, breaks his leg, and everybody in the village says, how terrible. And the Zen master says, we'll see. Then a war breaks out, and all the young men have to go off and fight, except the boy can't because his leg's all messed up. And everybody in the village says, how wonderful.
And the Zen master says, we'll see.
So you get it.
No.
Theodore Roosevelt had his reasons for supporting the Japanese Empire at the expense of Korea. For one, he felt that Koreans were of a lesser race. He described the Korean people as being unenlightened and recalcitrant. During a meeting with Japan's Home Minister Suematsu Kensho, Roosevelt reportedly told him that Japan should just take Korea, like how the US took Cuba. Theodore Roosevelt had very little qualms about allowing the Japanese Empire to expand, at least not into American territory. Theodore's Nobel Prize came at the cost of Koreans and violated an important diplomatic trust between the US and Korea. However, today's peace agreement is tomorrow's declaration of war. 24 years after Theodore's presidency comes to an end, another Roosevelt would become president. And down the line, this one will be making a very different arrangement with Japan.
No,